Good Monday to you. It's August 29th. Welcome to Beyond the Briefing. A lot going on, especially in politics. So let's get to it. Last week, there was a special election in New York's 19th congressional district. The current lieutenant governor, man, have they had a lot of lieutenant governors in New York, but each one keeps kind of having to resign or whatever. But anyway, the Kathy Hochul, when she was lieutenant governor, became governor because Cuomo had stepped down. She appointed somebody. There was some disaster with them, and then she decided to nominate a former colleague of hers when she had served in Congress. So they became acting or whatever lieutenant governor. I don't know what the exact status is, but that then opened up a vacancy in New York 19th district. It was a very, very tight race, and you know so it was held by a Democrat. Biden had won the district by 2 points. Trump had won it back in 2016. And so a lot of people looked at this district. Democrat Pat Ryan versus Marcus Molinaro. Here's the thing. I tweeted this out before the race. Just to be clear, I worked for 2 years at the NRCC, the National Republican Congressional Committee, and I used to have a saying, special elections are special. They're for a reason, because it's much more of a straight-up turnout operation. You think about it. It's August. It's the middle of the summer. People are on vacation. They're going away. They're not focused on politics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is purely a turnout operation. And in a bellwether seat, in a tight seat like this, that's all it is. It's who can get their people out the most. Is there stuff to read into stuff? Is there lessons to be learned? Absolutely. But do you look at a race like this and project out for the entire country? Absolutely not. Anyway, it is held by a Democrat. Both parties went in big for it. Pat Ryan, the Democrat, ended up winning 51.1 over the Republican Marcus Molinaro, 48.9. So right there, we're talking about 2 points and low turnout, right? So this is like a glorified student council election kind of thing. I wouldn't read too much into this. I think that Republicans, the enthusiasm should have been higher. But then again, I don't know how many people were on vacation or traveling or getting ready for back to school. But it's not a normal election timing wise. So again, I would not read too much into this. But a lot of folks in the media went nuts on this race. And if you think about it, the spread was just outside of what Biden got in the district, and it was held by a Democrat. It remains a Democrat. Not a big deal. I think Republicans were excited to potentially cut down the margin. It would have only mattered because it would have made Nancy Pelosi, it would have made her job a little bit more difficult for the remaining couple months in this term. But that being said, we are 71 days out from the midterms. It's fascinating. If you look at you talk CNN, Politico, Washington Post, New York Times, every one of them to a T has a story about how the Republicans, they're not going to win as many seats as they thought they could. I guess it's all relative. I think that there's no question that the Democratic enthusiasm has kicked up because of what happened with that Kansas ruling. The Democrats have picked an issue, abortion, and really driven it home. And I will give them kudos for that. They have made this everything about abortion on their side. It's a motivating factor. If you look at some of the polling, the enthusiasm that is on each side, the Democrats have ticked up a little. That's good for them. And so Biden's approval rating, again, has ticked up a little, mostly if you think about it, because he's been out of sight. The guy went on vacation after being locked up in COVID world for 16 days. He goes on vacation down to South Carolina, then comes back, signs a bill, and goes on vacation again to his beach house. So it's almost like the more he stays in the basement, the more he stays out, the better he does. You've got gas prices falling. Again, nothing to do with him, but for the people that was a major concern for, that was hitting their budgets really tight. That's a big deal. And so, again, not that they did anything on it. It takes a little bit of pressure off the Democrats, though. But everyone in the media, in the mainstream media, is making this seem like the Democrats now could potentially, pull this thing off. Again, it'll be interesting. I keep saving these because I want to retweet them all after Election Day if they're wrong. Because there's nothing. It's interesting. There's not a ton of, except for they look at a couple things and get all excited. I think for people who aren't happy with inflation, who are seeing a tough job market, they're going to vote, and they're not voting for the party in power, and the Democrats control everything. So I don't know how they think this is that good of news, but yes, is it a little bit better because of Kansas? Is it a little bit better because of gas prices? Sure. But I don't think that is the be all and end all. And I think that you got to remember there's only so much in play on the House, right? Because there's only so many districts that because of redistricting are actually in play, and some new ones that were created because of redistricting. So the Republicans, what is available to pick up is somewhat limited. I still think they're going to do very well. And then I think when it comes to the Senate, we're going to see. We will see whether or not you're seeing that race in Ohio. Vance definitely now is up ahead of Tim Ryan, and he's up 4. I think it's a natural place to be. It'll come home. Obviously, the big races to really keep watching are in Georgia, with Herschel Walker's race, whether he can turn that thing around and get Warnock. But it's going to be interesting as we head into those final 70 days, whether or not they really go at each other and how this thing turns out. Obviously, Pennsylvania. We've talked about that before, whether Oz can close the gap with Fetterman and get ahead. He should. There's no reason he shouldn't. Arizona, you got the Blake Masters campaign trying to catch up to Mark Kelly, the Democratic incumbent. But here's the thing. That's not by that much. It really isn't. And I think that if they effectively tie all of this government spending on the IRS agents and everything around these Democrats and say, okay, they're the ones who did it. This is going to cost you and it's going to hurt. And we'll get to the student loan stuff in just a second. But I think that if they can effectively communicate this stuff, I don't see why any one of them can't turn it around and win all of these. So that's a very positive sign. And I think Republicans are starting to look also at Oregon and Colorado, a couple other places. The governor's races look pretty good as well. I will say this. I don't think that the Republicans will hold Massachusetts. I don't think they're going to hold Maryland. So instantly there's 2 losses. I don't think that should be a shock to anybody, though. The idea that we thought we were going to hold those 2 seats is ridiculous. So anyway, we are into these final 70 days. This is where this is sort of, if you will, you go from preseason to the actual season, post Labor Day, and we're heading into that final few days before Labor Day. Once Labor Day kicks in, it's all systems go. So keep an eye on that. I do want to get to this issue of student loans, though. It was fascinating, right? So the Biden administration wiped out $10,000 for regular loans, $20,000 on Pell Grants. The left really wanted him to do $50,000, which is insane. Here's why I think this is a fascinating thing. He said a year ago he couldn't do it. Pelosi said a year ago he didn't have the authority to do it. It had to go through Congress. And then they just come out and do it out of nowhere. Unbelievable. Elizabeth Warren interacted with this voter. RNC Research tweeted out the video. If you haven't seen it, I've subsequently retweeted it, so you can see it on my Twitter feed as well. She interacts with this voter who basically is a dad, and he says, "Hey, I worked hard. I worked two jobs. I paid all this off. What are you going to do to get my money?" And she mocks the guy. She's like, "Of course not." She laughs at him. He goes, "Literally, you're laughing at me now," and that's it just. The thing that is so funny is there are so many people that have sacrificed so much to go to college, right? And they've made choices, and this wasn't known to them when they made those choices. They worked 2 jobs. I was in an Uber the other day, and the father of this daughter, it was a Saturday night, I was going to dinner, and the father of a young woman was out driving an Uber up until midnight, and we were talking about it, and he said, "Well, I teach for a living. This is how much I make, and we wanted our daughter to be able to go to wherever she wanted to go, and so this is what I'm doing to help make that happen." That's sacrifice, man. I mean, I can't believe it. It's a Saturday night in the summer, and that's what he's doing. But he's if he knew that, oh, I could get an extra 10 grand, the government's just going to give up. Well, that would make a big difference. Think about all the people that went took advantage of the GI Bill, or went into the military as a way of paying for college. If they knew that they could just have $10,000 wiped out, maybe they wouldn't have made that choice. I'm glad they joined the military. I hope they got more out of it than they ever thought they would. We talked about this with Ronnie Jackson, if you remember a while ago. He's trying to pay for school, and then the military, like so many folks, ends up giving them something that they never had. But that's a side note. The reason that they offer that is, you get something in return. You go serve the country, and you get your college paid for, or at least partially paid for in some cases. But people have made serious sacrifices like that. Think about the people who go to trade school. Some of them, or do apprenticeships, plumbers and truck drivers and things like that, where that's not covered. They don't have these. That's not an option to them. They don't have Pell Grants for that stuff. So, or the people went to a cheaper place. Maybe you did get into Harvard, right? But you ended up going to a state school because you couldn't afford it. So all of these people, it just, in an instant, the government basically just said, "Oh, too bad." It's amazing. And 10 years ago, the government got involved in all of this and took it away. The one thing that's important to remember, nothing that they did controls costs. So all colleges are going to do is figure out, okay, I know we can keep bumping up the cost. People will take out more loans. I mean, seriously, there's a couple fundamental issues with this. There's nothing to control the cost, the rising cost of colleges, and they're not investing in education. They're investing in like woke stuff. So these colleges continue to have the price of tuition rise, and it's not like you're getting an increase in the quality of education. The other thing is, and I know this is brought up at some point, but like if you're going to a 4-year school and you're getting a degree in like gender studies or English or whatever, you should be able to. I think there's an element of having to think about what career am I going into, and is this worth it, right? So I get it. You go to medical school, you become a lawyer, whatever it is. You think, okay, I'm accumulating this debt, but I'm going to be able to pay it off. Going to do this. I'm not really sure that like going to get a degree in Latin or Greek and accumulating $70,000 in debt might be the smartest thing, if that's a year that you're going to say, okay, what is my career path going to look like that I can afford to accumulate this debt? But that's what I think has to be part of the equation. And it's not. It's irresponsible on so many levels that we're letting the university and these colleges just keep raising costs, let people make stupid decisions. And I think that we're missing a real conversation about what's cost, why are people doing this? And also we're basically allowing this discussion that, 4-year colleges are for everyone. They're not. Some people might go to trade school and that's the best thing that ever happened to them. But we have sort of built in this system that says if you don't have a 4-year degree, you're not as good. That's silly. And I think that's part of the problem. And so the left just wants to keep pumping money at people instead of addressing the problem. And there could be no better example on this. You heard, even the White House can't have a coherent discussion when the White House press secretary is asked about this. She can't articulate whether or not this is, quote, fair or not. It's unbelievable. As always, I do want to get to the media. It was funny, keeping on this idea of student loans. I mentioned this before, but Pelosi was asked point blank almost a year ago and about whether Biden had the authority to cancel student loans. And she said, no, the president can't do that. Similarly, Biden was asked about this. Can I cancel student, he said, I wish I could do it, but I can't. It has to go through the legislative process. Okay. So then this weekend, all these Democrats go out on the Sunday shows and not one was asked about this. Wouldn't you think to say, hey, Congressman, Senator, the President of the United States, the Speaker of the House, previously said that what the President just did is not constitutional. It's not legal. He doesn't have the authority to do it. So wouldn't you think that would be a good question? I do. I think that would make a ton of sense. And yet, not one of them got asked that. They asked all the other questions about everything else in the sun to the Republicans. But when it came to the Democrats, they weren't too worried about whether or not the president had the authority to do this. They were just talking about how there's dissent within the party. Okay, that's great. Why is there dissent? Part of it is because he doesn't have the authority to do it. Part of it is because the far left thinks he should have done a lot more. But at the end of the day, the president of the United States was asked about this. And he said he didn't have it. And suddenly, like nothing happened. He changed his mind and they announced this. And everyone goes, okay, good, nods their head. It's unbelievable. I cannot believe the negligence. And that's what it really is. It's negligence on behalf of so-called journalists. Because they have people on their show. They don't ask those questions. And it blows my mind what they do. A couple other things that came up in the media last couple of days. Mark Zuckerberg was on Joe Rogan, which I actually, in a weird way, I give Zuckerberg some credit for this because you did not I don't know why he did it. I don't know. Maybe he has a man crush on the guy. Maybe they're friends on Facebook, and that's part of the deal. I don't know. But I kind of thought it was interesting that he went on Rogan in the first place. Because I, for the little that that guy does, I did not peg him as going on Joe Rogan, but he did. And Rogan's asking him about Hunter Biden's laptop story and why it was suppressed. And he made the distinction that, well, we're not Twitter. We didn't do it like Twitter, but we definitely slowed it down. And we did, a lot of fancy Silicon Valley talk. But at the end of the day, what really mattered was this. He said that the FBI told them to do that. The FBI told them to restrict the flow of that information right before an election. How crazy is that? You want to talk about disinformation? Think about that. The suppression of information that could be harmful to a candidate for the presidency, and the FBI goes in and says, slow that down. And apparently they're coming out now saying, oh, well, we kind of do this a lot. What, really? I've never heard of this before. But it's fascinating because, again, that story in itself got buried. If it wasn't for conservative media, stuff like we talk about it on Newsmax, Spicer and Company, but that's pretty much it. You didn't see a bunch of stories about that with the FBI doing it. Anyway, John Carl also put out a tweet, or he was talking about this week about how he thinks that there's a lot of freaking out among the Trump inner circle, quote unquote, about the legal team. The interesting thing is, knowing John Carl and the sources or whatever, I have a feeling that somebody in Trump world is just upset with somebody else, and that's who they're, because he is definitely not considered somebody that has their pulse on the inner circle. It's an interesting thing. I think it's just one of those nuggets that he wanted to have as he came to the table, um, right before the Sunday show. There's also some questions that were coming up about the president's platform, Truth Social, and whether or not where it stands right now financially. It'll be interesting to see over the next couple of weeks if anything more comes out on this. I don't know anything more than I've read, but there is some question apparently about whether or not they are, where things stand. Um, I was telling you about the question about the student loan, and Tim Ryan, who is the current congressman, but he's a Senate nominee. He was on CNN State of the Union, and he is one of those guys that does oppose the student loan stuff. But he got asked why he opposes it, and he says the cost of college is outrageous, but there's nothing to do to control the cost. And again, I think we can get a significant way down the road by allowing them to renegotiate the interest rates. Again, no discussion about the fact that the federal government took over the program. No discussion about the fact that he didn't have the authority to do it. It's just why he opposed it, and it was kind of it's unbelievable that they never actually asked him. He was also, by the way, asked about abortion, which I thought was fascinating, and he was basically pushed. Which I'll give Dana Bash some credit on that. He was saying that he wants those decisions between a woman and a doctor. Okay, so then she says, what are any restrictions? And he says those. So he comes out, and I think this is the current Democratic position: no restrictions. What you think about in terms of everyone calls each other extreme. No restrictions. I mean, partial birth, nothing. Again, not much coverage on that. We will and have been talking about that on Spicer and Company. So if you want to hear more of a discussion on that, but it was fascinating. By the way, I actually was interested this morning. This Artemis rocket was supposed to take off. It did not. Bill Nelson, who was a former U.S. Senator from Florida, he's the current at NASA administrator because he is a former astronaut. He was on Meet the Press and he got asked about it because the cost of this program is so over budget and behind schedule. He said, we test it, we stress it, we make this rocket and the spacecraft to do things that we'd never do with the human crew. The main purpose of the flight is to test the heat shield because you can't test that in a lab. It didn't take off today. I guess it was one of the engines, the number 4, I think, or the number 3. I can't remember. That does not bode well. It was funny in Politico this morning. I'm going to tweet this out probably this afternoon. They talked about the fact that like one of Kamala Harris's 18 jobs that no one knows what she does is to be the head of the President's Space Council. And they were like, you can't make this up. By the way, one of the guys who writes Politico's playbook is a guy named Eugene Daniels. He literally, on a daily basis, is almost auditioning to be her spokesperson. It's kind of sad. Anyway, they write this thing, we will see today the fruit of her labor, something ridiculous. And I'm like, and then a couple minutes later it comes out and says, the rocket will not launch because that if they built it up and then just let it pop. Anyway, it was unbelievable. Finally, can't go without talking about the release of this Mar-a-Lago affidavit. I've said this all along, so I think I'm pretty clear on this. I think you all know this. That was a joke. That was literally like a bunch of pages with on stationery and blacked out stuff. I mean, I know everybody was trying to read the tea leaves on that, but what a joke. It'll be interesting now to see where this goes on a bunch of fronts. One, a lot of chatter about a potential indictment. Oh man, if that happens, Katie bar the door, baby. The idea that you're indicting a former president off of this whole thing. And again, I don't want to undermine in any way the serious nature of having classified information that's not secured. Okay, just so we're clear on this. But think about Comey. Think about Hillary Clinton. Nothing. Nada. Right? Comey, in the case of Clinton, literally said at that press conference, I don't think there's a single prosecutor that would ever bring a case. Not that that's even his job to determine, but that's what he said. So it's interesting that somehow now. The second thing is that by all accounts, Trump was working with these folks. So I just, it'll be fascinating to see how the government can present something that says, yes, you were working with us. Yes, we were doing all this, but somehow we had to go to DEFCON 1. Anyway, I think that's so this week, right? We've got two other big things coming out, though. One, you've got this hearing on a special master, whether or not it'll be appointed or not. I think it's Thursday. That's going to be a big deal. And then, because again, it'll be interesting to see what that role then becomes. It's tricky because of the nature of what we're talking about, because it is classified. The second thing is this idea of the DOJ having to provide essentially an inventory for all the stuff that was taken. We're going to have, if you're listening to this on Monday, we're going to have Alan Dershowitz on the show tonight. We'll try to pull this thread a little bit and figure out what all of this means and where do we think it's headed, because I sort of am fascinated by it all. The director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, told congressional committee chairs in a letter on Friday, though, that the intelligence committee will examine potential national security ramifications from all these documents. It'll be interesting. Now, I will say this again, for the record, I have spent 20-something years in the military, worked in the White House, worked in the U.S. Trade Reps Office. I've been around classified information for a long time. Take it seriously. There's done for a reason, right? So I want to make sure I'm very clear about my position on that. But they started to talk about the different categories that Trump had. A lot of this stuff is confidential. Confidential, in many cases, is literally. Thanks, Siri. Confidential is literally like personal information. Like it could be someone's address, it could be their birthday. It's a combination of things. And then the secret level, again, you're really pushing the envelope on that. This is not serious stuff. There's a lot of stuff at the secret level that just contains a lot of personal information. It's not until you get to the TS level that you're really talking about anything serious. And then, to be honest with you, it's above that we're getting into grave national security. They even have definitions for all of this, and that's why you can literally go look up where the government defines it. I'm not undermining any of the seriousness in this, but what I'm saying is a lot of the stuff, when you looked at the amount, it's a very selective handful of things that are at that level. So, for example, I wouldn't be surprised if the letter from Kim Jong-un to President Trump is classified at a TS or higher level because of the sensitive nature of what's in it. Obviously, he's seen it, he's waved it around. So I'm guessing, but what I'm saying is it's knowing what's there also matters. And how much of this is like personal stuff. It's not like, if you think about it, the President of the United States is briefed every single day that he's president about national security issues. If he wanted to spill national security information, he could do it at any time based on just what's in his head. So these documents are intriguing in the sense that, are they literally just things that he had that were given to him, that were presented, that have been classified, or are they truly something that could be potentially damaging? But I think that's going to be the rub in this. But obviously we have a lot to get to this week, and we'll be keeping an eye on all of it. we have a great episode coming on Thursday, and we'll continue to give you updates then as well. Until then, I appreciate you subscribing, saving, sharing, and reviewing. All that's really helpful on that, especially like on the Apple one. If you're getting your iTunes on Apple, I think they all do, Spotify, whatever. But it helps move it up and down the chart. And so if you have, please do. If you haven't, subscribing and then reviewing is super helpful. Appreciate it. Have a great week. I'll see you on Thursday.